My son pushed my wheelchair away from the Christmas table and said, "This seat's for my father-in-law." That's when I knew my own child had chosen money over blood. Because what Austin didn't know was that I had been listening to his phone calls for 6 months, recording every word about the $127 million life insurance policy they planned to cash in. And I wasn't actually paralyzed. Sometimes in chess, the weakest pawn becomes the most powerful queen. This story has more turns than open heart surgery, and by the end, you'll understand why some family betrayals demand justice, not forgiveness. Before we begin, let me ask you, have you ever felt completely invisible in your own home? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and make sure to subscribe because this tale of family, money, and revenge will stay with you long after it ends. My name is Dr. Benjamin Crawford. For 35 years, I saved lives as a cardiac surgeon at Crawford Cardiac Institute. I've held beating hearts in my hands, made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death, but nothing prepared me for the moment I discovered my own son plotting to kill me. It started 6 months ago with what everyone believed was a car accident. I was driving home from the hospital after a particularly long surgery when a truck ran the red light at the intersection of 5th and Main. The impact was severe enough to convince everyone, the paramedics, the doctors, even my own family, that I had suffered spinal damage that left me paralyzed from the waist down. But here's what nobody knew. I wasn't paralyzed at all. The neurologist, Dr. Martinez, was an old friend from medical school. When the initial tests showed no actual spinal damage, just severe bruising and inflammation, we made a decision that would change everything. Martinez falsified my medical records, documenting permanent paralysis, while I secretly underwent physical therapy in a private clinic across town. Why would we do such a thing? Because in the weeks following the accident, I had begun to notice changes in my son Austin's behavior that troubled me deeply. Austin had always been my pride and joy. At 32, he was a successful sales manager, married to Stephanie, and seemingly devoted to family. But after the accident, I noticed him whispering with his father-in-law, Douglas Peterson, more frequently. They would stop talking whenever I entered the room. Douglas, a successful insurance attorney, had begun visiting our house regularly, always carrying thick folders of documents. 3 months into my supposed paralysis, I overheard something that made my blood freeze. It was 11:45 on a Tuesday night. I was in my wheelchair in the hallway outside Austin's study when I heard him on the phone. His voice was hushed, conspiratorial, and completely unlike the son I thought I knew. "The policy is active," Austin was saying. "Metropolitan Life, policy number ML774981, $127 million. There was a pause, then, "Douglas says we just need to be patient. Dad could live another 20 years. That's money we need now." Another pause, then the words that shattered my world. What if we didn't have to wait? Douglas has some ideas about accelerating the timeline. I sat in that wheelchair in the dark hallway, my supposedly paralyzed legs trembling with rage and disbelief, listening to my son discuss my death like a business transaction. Over the next 2 months, I became a student of my own family's betrayal. Every day, I pretended to be the helpless father, dependent on their care, while secretly documenting their conspiracy. I installed recording devices throughout the house, tiny transmitters hidden in picture frames, under furniture, even in the handle of my wheelchair. I set up cameras in rooms they thought were private, disguised as medical monitoring equipment that they assumed was there for my care. And what I discovered was worse than I had initially imagined. Douglas Peterson wasn't just Austin's father-in-law. He was the architect of this entire scheme, a predator who had spent decades perfecting the art of turning children against their parents for financial gain. Through my investigation, I learned that Douglas had orchestrated similar insurance frauds before. His first wife, Margaret Peterson, had died in a suspicious house fire in 2019. The insurance payout was $200 million. The case was never solved, but the pattern was unmistakable. Douglas had been grooming Austin for months before my accident, slowly and systematically poisoning his mind against me. The process was insidious. Casual comments about how my medical expenses were affecting the family finances, suggestions that I was becoming a burden rather than a blessing, implications that my continued existence was somehow selfish. Douglas would present himself as the wise father figure that Austin had always needed, someone who understood business and money in ways that I, as a mere doctor, could never comprehend. Your father doesn't understand the financial realities of modern life, I heard Douglas tell Austin during one recorded conversation. He's stuck in an old-fashioned mindset, where family loyalty matters more than practical considerations. But Austin, you're smarter than that. You understand that sometimes love means us making difficult decisions. Stephanie, Austin's wife, was fully complicit in the manipulation. She had been researching untraceable poisons on the dark web, hiring specialized cleaning services that dealt with biohazard situations, and even practicing how to act grief-stricken for the inevitable police interviews. I found her practice sessions recorded on her phone, hours of footage of her perfecting the art of fake tears and devastated widow performance. But perhaps most chilling was discovering the depth of their planning. The Metropolitan Life Insurance policy had been purchased 18 months earlier, with Douglas's legal firm handling all the paperwork. The timing wasn't coincidental. They had been planning this long before my accident provided the perfect cover story. In fact, as I learned from intercepted emails, Douglas had been advising Austin to increase my life insurance coverage gradually over a 3-year period, ensuring that the final policy amount wouldn't trigger automatic investigations. The $127 million policy was structured as a key man insurance policy for Crawford Cardiac Institute, with Austin listed as the primary beneficiary in case of my death. On paper, it looked like responsible business planning. In reality, it was a murder contract with a $127 million payout. By November, I had 47 hours of recorded conversations, documented financial transfers totaling $85,000 in preparation payments, and photographic evidence of meetings with individuals whose backgrounds I was still investigating. The payments included $15,000 for consultation fees to someone identified only as VK in the financial records, $25,000 for security services provided by an unnamed contractor, and $45,000 transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But I wasn't working alone anymore. My daughter Sarah, a criminal defense attorney working in the district attorney's office, had noticed the same behavioral changes in Austin that had initially troubled me. When I finally revealed the truth to her about my condition and what I had discovered, she didn't just believe me. She had been conducting her own parallel investigation for 8 months. "Dad," she said during our first clandestine meeting in the parking garage of her office building, "I've been gathering evidence since last spring. The DA's office has been watching Douglas Peterson since Margaret's death. We suspected he was running some kind of insurance fraud operation, but we could never prove it. Your case is the missing piece we needed." Sarah had been using her position in the DA's office to access financial records and insurance databases. She had discovered that Douglas's law firm had been involved in processing unusually large life insurance policies for at least 12 different clients over the past 5 years. In 8 of those cases, the policyholder had died within 2 years of the policy being issued. The statistical probability of such a pattern occurring naturally was virtually impossible. "Douglas isn't just a murderer," Sarah explained. "He's running a systematic operation. He identifies wealthy families, infiltrates their lives, manipulates family members into participating in murder plots, and then collects massive insurance payouts. You're not his first victim, Dad. You're just his latest." Sarah introduced me to Detective James Murphy, badge number 29556, a 20-year veteran of the fraud division who had been building a case against Douglas for years. Murphy was a soft-spoken man in his mid-50s who had spent most of his career investigating white-collar crime. But Douglas Peterson represented something different, a criminal who combined sophisticated financial fraud with cold-blooded murder. "Dr. Crawford," Murphy said during our first meeting, "your son and his conspirators have committed multiple federal crimes. Insurance fraud involving interstate commerce triggers federal jurisdiction automatically. Add conspiracy to commit murder, and we're looking at potential RICO charges. If we can get them to confess on record, we can guarantee convictions. Murphy explained that the FBI had been tracking Douglas's activities for 3 years, but they had never been able to get close enough to gather the kind of evidence needed for prosecution. My situation was different because I was inside the conspiracy, able to record conversations and document activities in real time. The key, Murphy said, is to get them to move from planning to action while we're watching. If we can catch them in the act of attempting murder, we'll have everything we need. That's when we began planning the trap. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would use Christmas dinner as the setting for my revelation, but first, we needed them to incriminate themselves completely. The key was making them believe that their timeline was accelerating, that they needed to act immediately or lose their opportunity forever. On December 20th, I made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in Austin's desk, I found a bank statement showing a wire transfer of $50,000 to an account belonging to Victor Kozlov, a name that Detective Murphy immediately recognized. Victor Kozlov, Murphy explained over our encrypted phone call, is a professional killer. He specializes in making murders look like accidents. If your son has paid him $50,000, it means they've moved beyond planning to active execution. The money had been transferred on December 20th. According to the communication logs we had intercepted, Victor was scheduled to carry out the accident on January 3rd during my regular physical therapy appointment. An appointment that, ironically, they believed I was attending to maintain muscle tone in my paralyzed legs. The method was to be a garage accident, carbon monoxide poisoning while I sat in my wheelchair behind my car as it accidentally idled. Victor would position everything to make it look like I had forgotten to turn off the engine, fallen asleep, and succumbed to the fumes. Austin would discover my body hours later, after Victor had long since disappeared. "We have less than 2 weeks," Sarah told me during our emergency meeting on December 21st. "If we're going to catch them red-handed, it has to be now." That's when Detective Murphy introduced me to FBI Agent Collins from the Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Collins explained that the federal government had been building a case against Douglas Peterson's insurance fraud network for 3 years. My situation was the break they needed. "Dr. Crawford," Agent Collins said, "we want to wire you for Christmas dinner. If we can get them to discuss the murder plot while you're wearing a recording device, we'll have enough evidence to charge them with conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and racketeering." The plan was audacious. I would attend Christmas dinner as the helpless father, allowing them to treat me with the contempt they had been showing for months. At the climax of the evening, when they pushed me aside to make room for Douglas, at the head of my own table, I would stand up, reveal that I had been recording everything, and watch as their carefully constructed world collapsed. But there was one element we hadn't anticipated. Victor Kozlov himself would be at the Christmas dinner. On December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, Sarah made a discovery that elevated the stakes beyond anything we had imagined. While reviewing the surveillance footage from Austin's house, she spotted a man she didn't recognize entering through the back door late at night. "Dad, look at this," Sarah said, showing me the enhanced photograph on her laptop. This man entered Austin's house at 2:30 a.m. on December 22nd. He stayed for 3 hours. Detective Murphy identified him immediately. Victor Kozlov. "This changes everything," Murphy said during our emergency meeting. "If Victor's already in town, if he's already met with your son, then the timeline might be accelerated. They might not wait until January 3rd. Agent Collins ran a trace on Victor's current location. What we discovered made my blood run cold. Victor was staying at a hotel less than 5 miles from my house, registered under the name Vincent Kelly, and had been conducting surveillance on my daily routine for the past week. "Dr. Crawford," Agent Collins said, "we need to move fast. We're going to wire your house. We're going to wire you, and we're going to have a full surveillance team in position for Christmas dinner. If Victor shows up, if they attempt anything during the dinner itself, we'll be ready." But that wasn't the worst part. Sarah had been monitoring Austin's phone calls, and on December 24th, Christmas Eve, she intercepted a conversation that made us realize how completely we had underestimated the scope of their conspiracy. The call was between Austin and Douglas, but they weren't discussing the murder plot. They were discussing what would happen after my death. The foundation has 32 million in assets, Douglas was explaining. Once your father is gone, you'll inherit controlling interest in Crawford Cardiac Institute. We'll liquidate everything, pay out the life insurance, and you'll walk away with over $200 million total. Austin's response chilled me to the bone. What about Sarah? She'll inherit half of everything. Douglas's laugh was cold and calculating. Sarah's inheritance is already taken care of. Victor's services include family discounts for additional contracts. They weren't just planning to kill me, they were planning to kill Sarah, too. I called an emergency meeting with Agent Collins and Detective Murphy. When I told them what Sarah had overheard, the federal response was immediate and overwhelming. This is now a multiple murder conspiracy with federal implications, Agent Collins explained. We're bringing in a full FBI tactical team. Christmas dinner is going to be the takedown operation. Sarah, despite our protests, insisted on attending the dinner as planned. They can't suspect anything, she argued. If I suddenly don't show up, they'll know something is wrong. Besides, with the tactical team in position, I'll be safer at the dinner than anywhere else. The plan was finalized on Christmas morning. I would attend dinner wearing a wire transmitter that would broadcast every word to the FBI surveillance van parked 3 blocks away. Sarah would be wearing a panic button that would immediately signal the tactical team if she felt threatened. Detective Murphy would be positioned in the house across the street, with a clear view of all entrances and exits. At 3:30 p.m. on Christmas Day, I arrived at Austin's house in my wheelchair, playing the role of the helpless father for what I hoped would be the last time. What I didn't know was that Victor Kozlov was already in the house. Christmas dinner at Austin's house had always been a sacred tradition. For 32 years, since Austin was born, our family had gathered around that same oak dining table that Elizabeth and I had bought during our first year of marriage. The table had witnessed birthday celebrations, homework sessions, difficult conversations about grades and curfews, and countless moments of ordinary family happiness. As I wheeled myself up the ramp Austin had installed after my accident, I couldn't help but think about how completely that sacred space had been corrupted. The house itself told the story of our family's rise and fall. Austin had bought it 5 years earlier with money Elizabeth and I had provided as a wedding gift. It was a beautiful colonial in the historic district with wide hallways that were supposedly designed for aging in place, though I now realize that Austin's concern about wheelchair accessibility had nothing to do with my comfort and everything to do with maintaining the appearance of a devoted son. Stephanie greeted me at the door with the same fake warmth she had perfected over the past 6 months. Her smile was bright and practiced, the kind of expression she had probably rehearsed in the mirror. Ben, Merry Christmas! We're so glad you could make it. The roads weren't too bad for the wheelchair van, were they? The concern in her voice was perfectly calibrated, enough to seem caring, not enough to seem suspicious. I had learned to read these performances with the clinical precision I had once applied to reading EKGs. Every inflection, every gesture was designed to maintain the illusion that I was a beloved family member rather than a murder victim waiting to happen. Behind her, I could see the dining room table set for 8 people. 8. That was one more than our usual Christmas gathering of 7. Someone else was joining us tonight, and I had a terrible suspicion about who it might be. Austin appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel and wearing the same apron Elizabeth had bought him when he first moved out of our house. The sight of that apron, a silly thing with "World's Best Cook" printed on it, hit me harder than I expected. This was the same man who used to call me every Sunday, who had cried at his mother's funeral, who had once told me that he wanted to be exactly like me when he grew up. Now he was planning to murder me for money. "Hey, Dad," Austin said, kissing my forehead with the practiced affection of a son who had learned to fake love. "How are you feeling today? The trip over wasn't too tiring, was it? I know the holidays can be overwhelming when you're dealing with all this." He gestured vaguely at my wheelchair, as if my supposed paralysis was something embarrassing that we didn't need to discuss directly. The condescension in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. This wasn't how he used to talk to me. This was how you might speak to a child, or to someone whose mental capacity you questioned. I'm fine, son, I replied, playing my part with the same precision I had once used during surgery. Just grateful to spend Christmas with family. It means everything to me, especially after this difficult year. Austin's expression flickered for just a moment. A brief flash of something that might have been guilt, or perhaps just irritation that I was still alive to be grateful for anything. Of course, Dad, family is what matters most. The irony was so thick I could have performed surgery on it. Douglas Peterson emerged from the kitchen, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the satisfied expression of a man whose carefully laid plans were proceeding exactly as expected. Douglas was a large man, probably 6'3", with silver hair and the kind of expensive casual clothing that screamed successful lawyer. He had the presence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, and tonight, in my own family's gathering, he clearly expected to claim that position. "Ben, wonderful to see you," Douglas said, his voice booming with false heartiness. "I hope you don't mind, but I invited a friend to join us tonight. Victor Kelly, a business associate from overseas. He's in town for the holidays and didn't have anywhere to go. I thought you'd understand. The spirit of Christmas hospitality and all that." My blood turned to ice. Victor Kozlov was here at Christmas dinner using the alias Victor Kelly. This wasn't part of the plan we had discussed with the FBI. The surveillance team needed to know immediately that our primary target was in the house. I reached slowly for the small emergency transmitter in my jacket pocket, trying to appear as if I was simply adjusting my blanket. The device was disguised as a medical alert pendant, something that would seem perfectly normal for a paralyzed man to wear. But before I could activate it, Austin moved behind my wheelchair. "Dad, we need to talk about something," Austin said, his voice taking on a tone I had never heard before. Cold, authoritative, completely unlike the respectful son I thought I knew. "There's been a change in the seating arrangement tonight." "Change?" I asked, genuinely confused about what was happening. "This seat," Austin said, pointing to the head of the table where I had sat, "for every family gathering for the past 32 years, is for Douglas tonight. He's the head of the family now. You understand, don't you? With your condition, with everything that's happened, it just makes more sense for him to take charge." The symbolism was devastating and perfectly clear. This wasn't just about Christmas dinner seating. This was about power, about who mattered in this family, about who had value and who was disposable. Austin was publicly demonstrating that Douglas Peterson, a man who was not even blood family, was more important than his own father. "Head of the family?" I repeated, unable to keep the hurt out of my voice. "Douglas, I don't understand. This is my family's table. This is where Elizabeth and I sat for 28 years of marriage. This is where we raised our children." Douglas smiled, and in that smile, I saw everything I needed to know about his character. It was the smile of a predator who had successfully isolated his prey. "Ben, I appreciate your attachment to tradition, but traditions sometimes need to evolve. Austin and I have been discussing the family's future, and we both agree that new leadership is needed. You're welcome here, of course, but perhaps it's time to acknowledge that you're no longer able to provide the guidance that this family needs." The psychological cruelty was breathtaking. Douglas wasn't just taking my seat. He was systematically dismantling my identity as a father, as a patriarch, as someone who mattered. And Austin was standing behind my wheelchair, nodding in agreement. "Austin," I said, turning to look at my son, "do you really want me to move away from our family table so that your father-in-law can sit in my place?" Austin wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad, you're taking up space at this point. Douglas needs to discuss some important business matters tonight, and frankly, those discussions are beyond your ability to understand or contribute to anymore." Taking up space. My own son had just told me that I was taking up space in my own family. Now that's when I saw him. Victor Kozlov was sitting in what used to be Sarah's chair, quietly observing the family dynamics with the clinical interest of a professional who was evaluating his target. He was a compact man in his 50s, with cold gray eyes and hands that looked like they had done terrible things. He was wearing an expensive suit and a watch that probably cost more than most people's cars, but there was something predatory about his stillness, something that suggested violence barely held in check. "Business?" I asked, activating the emergency transmitter in my pocket while keeping my voice steady. What kind of business are you discussing at Christmas dinner, Douglas? Douglas settled into my chair, Elizabeth's chair, the chair where we had made 30 years of family decisions together, with the confidence of a conqueror claiming conquered territory. Insurance business, Ben. Very lucrative insurance business. The kind of business that secures family futures. Austin pushed my wheelchair away from the head of the table, rolling me toward a corner spot that had clearly been prepared for this moment. The humiliation was complete and public. In front of a hired killer, in front of his wife, in front of a man who was orchestrating our family's destruction, Austin had chosen to demonstrate that his father was worthless, disposable, no longer worthy of respect or consideration. But they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that a man in a wheelchair was powerless. I activated the emergency signal that would alert Detective Murphy and the FBI surveillance team that Viktor Kozlov was in the house and that the situation had escalated beyond our expectations. Then I stood up. The silence in the room was absolute and electric. Austin's hand was still on the back of my wheelchair, his face frozen in an expression of complete shock. Stephanie dropped the serving platter she had been carrying, sending Christmas china crashing to the floor in an explosion of sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. Douglas's wine glass slipped from his fingers, red wine spreading across Elizabeth's white lace tablecloth like blood. Only Victor showed no surprise. His hand moved slowly but deliberately toward his jacket pocket, where I assumed he kept whatever weapon he preferred for close-quarters work. Austin, I said, my voice carrying the authority of 35 years of life-and-death medical decisions, step away from my chair. Dad, what? How are you? Standing? Walking? I took a step toward him, then another, watching his face transform from shock to confusion to something approaching terror. I've been standing and walking for 6 months, son. The question is, how are you going to explain to the FBI why you hired a professional killer to murder your father? Austin's legs buckled, and he collapsed into the nearest chair, his face white with shock and terror. Dad, I can explain. It's not what you think. We weren't really going to hurt you. We were just exploring options. Douglas said we needed to consider all possibilities for the family's financial future. Even now, even caught red-handed, Austin was trying to minimize his crime, to reframe attempted murder as financial planning. Victor's hand stopped moving toward his pocket. Through the dining room window, I could see the red and blue lights of police cars surrounding the house, their silent presence a reminder that justice was finally closing in on these people who had betrayed every principle that families are supposed to represent. Hello, Victor, I said, turning to face the man who had been paid $50,000 to kill me. Or do you prefer Victor Kelly? I've been looking forward to meeting you. The back door burst open before anyone could respond. FBI agents in tactical gear flooded into the room, weapons drawn, shouting commands that transformed our family's Christmas dinner into a federal crime scene. FBI, nobody move! Hands where we can see them! Douglas tried to run toward the front door, but it opened to reveal more federal agents. He was trapped, surrounded, his carefully constructed criminal empire collapsing around him in real time. Dr. Benjamin Crawford? Agent Collins appeared at my side, his weapon trained on Victor while he spoke to me. Are you all right, sir? I'm perfect, Agent Collins, I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. How much did you get? Everything, sir. We have everything. In the chaos that followed, as FBI agents secured the scene and read rights to Austin, Stephanie, Douglas, and Victor, I found myself thinking about the nature of betrayal. As a surgeon, I had always believed that the worst thing that could happen to a patient was a medical error, a mistake that cost them their life. But I was wrong. The worst thing is deliberate harm inflicted by someone who has sworn to protect you. Sarah arrived with Detective Murphy just as the last of the suspects were being loaded into federal transport vehicles. She ran to me with tears streaming down her face, not of sadness, but of relief. Dad, I was so scared something would go wrong, she said, embracing me with the fierce love that had sustained me through this entire nightmare. Nothing went wrong, sweetheart, I told her. Everything went exactly according to plan. Agent Collins approached with a tablet containing preliminary charges. Dr. Crawford, I wanted you to be the first to know. We're charging Austin Crawford, Stephanie Crawford, and Douglas Peterson with conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, money laundering, and racketeering under the RICO statute. Viktor Kozlov is being charged with attempted murder for hire in violation of federal immigration laws. He entered the country illegally, specifically to commit this crime. Detective Murphy added, the Financial Crimes Unit has already frozen all of their assets. Douglas Peterson's law firm is being investigated by the State Bar Association, and we expect additional charges related to Margaret Peterson's death to be filed within the week. As I watched the police cars disappear into the distance, carrying away the people who had once been my family, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but profound sadness. The victory was hollow because of what it had cost. Dad, Sarah said, reading my expression, you did the right thing. They would have killed you. They would have killed me. They had to be stopped. She was right, of course, but that didn't make it easier to accept that my own son had chosen money over love, greed over loyalty, murder over family. The next morning, December 26th, the story broke on every major news network. Prominent surgeon exposes murder plot by his own son. The media attention was overwhelming, but I refused all interview requests. This wasn't a story I wanted to tell to the world. It was a wound I needed to heal in private. Over the following weeks, as the legal proceedings moved forward, the full scope of Douglas Peterson's criminal enterprise became clear. The FBI investigation revealed at least 6 suspicious insurance payouts, totaling more than $800 million over the past 15 years. Austin and Stephanie weren't Douglas's first victims. They were just his latest recruits in a decades-long pattern of exploitation and murder. On January 15th, exactly 2 weeks after Viktor Kozlov's original plan to kill me would have been executed, I received a call from Agent Collins with the final tally of charges. Austin was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Stephanie received 20 years. Douglas Peterson was sentenced to life in prison without parole for his role as the ringleader of what prosecutors called the most sophisticated insurance fraud conspiracy in modern American history. Viktor Kozlov was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison and would be deported upon completion of his sentence. The $127 million life insurance policy was voided due to the fraudulent circumstances of its purchase. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with a question that had no easy answer. What do you do when justice has been served, but your heart is still broken? The Crawford Cardiac Institute continued to operate, but I found that I could no longer perform surgery with the same confidence I had once possessed. Every time I held a scalpel, I thought about the precision with which my own family had planned to cut me out of their lives. After 35 years of saving lives, I realized that I needed to save my own. I announced my retirement on February 1st and began the process of transferring ownership of the Institute to a nonprofit foundation. The facility would continue to provide cardiac care, but now it would also offer services to families who couldn't afford treatment. It seemed fitting that the money Austin had tried to steal through murder would instead be used to save lives. Sarah threw herself into her work with the district attorney's office, using the skills she had developed during our investigation to help other families who had been victimized by similar crimes. She became a specialist in financial elder abuse and insurance fraud, and within 6 months, she had been promoted to head the newly created Elder Justice Division. But perhaps the most surprising development came in early March, when I received a letter from Austin. The letter was delivered through his attorney, and Sarah advised me not to read it. "Dad, he's going to try to manipulate you," she warned. "He's going to claim that he was coerced, that he never really intended to hurt you, that Douglas brainwashed him. Don't let him get inside your head." I read the letter anyway. Austin's handwriting was the same as it had been when he was 10 years old, carefully forming each letter as if the precision of his penmanship could somehow make his words more truthful. "Dad," the letter began, "I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to. I know that sorry isn't enough, that nothing I can say will undo what I tried to do to you. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Douglas convinced me that you were a burden, that you were suffering, that we would all be better off if you were gone. I know now that he was grooming me, manipulating me, turning me into someone I never wanted to be. But I also know that's not an excuse. I made choices, terrible choices, and I have to live with them for the rest of my life. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing his remorse, his recognition of the enormity of his crimes, and his commitment to spending his prison sentence trying to understand how he had become the kind of person who could plot his father's murder. At the end, he wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that every day for the rest of my life, I will remember what I almost did to you, and I will try to find a way to honor the man you raised me to be, even though I failed so completely to be that man." I read the letter 3 times before deciding what to do with it. I burned it, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Austin was serving a 25-year sentence, and I was 74 years old. The mathematics of our situation were cruel but clear. There was a significant possibility that one or both of us would die before he was released from prison. I could spend whatever years I had left consumed by the betrayal and the loss, or I could choose to build something meaningful from the ashes of our relationship. I chose to build. On April 10th, exactly 4 months after Viktor Kozlov's original plan to murder me would have been carried out, I held the groundbreaking ceremony for the Crawford Children's Heart Foundation. The foundation would provide free cardiac surgery for children whose families couldn't afford treatment, using the same surgical suites where I had spent 3.5 decades saving lives. Sarah stood beside me as I turned the first shovel of earth for the new pediatric wing. "Dad," she said, "I think this is what Mom would have wanted." She was referring to my wife, Elizabeth, who had died 8 years earlier from the same kind of congenital heart defect that the foundation would specialize in treating. Elizabeth had always believed that our family's wealth came with the responsibility to help others, particularly children who hadn't had the advantages that our own children had enjoyed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Austin's attempt to inherit my fortune through murder had instead resulted in that fortune being used to save the lives of children. By summer, the foundation was operational. Our first patient was a 6-year-old girl named Maria, whose family had driven 18 hours from rural Arkansas because they had heard about the free cardiac program. Her surgery was successful, and watching her run around the hospital playground 2 weeks later, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Austin's arrest: pure, uncomplicated joy. Detective Murphy visited me regularly during this period, partly for business reasons. There were ongoing cases related to Douglas Peterson's criminal network, and partly because we had developed an unexpected friendship during the investigation. One afternoon in late July, he brought news that would close the final chapter of my family's legal nightmare. "Dr. Crawford," Murphy said, settling into the chair across from my office desk, "I thought you'd want to know that we've solved Margaret Peterson's murder." Margaret, Douglas's first wife, had died in what everyone assumed was a house fire. But the FBI's investigation into Douglas's criminal activities had uncovered evidence that the fire was deliberately set. "Douglas hired Viktor Kozlov to kill Margaret in 2019, Murphy explained. "Same method he planned to use on you, actually. Victor was supposed to make it look like an electrical fire, but he got greedy and demanded more money. Douglas paid him an additional $100,000 to keep quiet, but Victor kept detailed records of all his contracts. When the FBI searched his hotel room, they found documentation of 17 different murders for hire over the past 10 years. 17 murders, 17 families destroyed by Douglas Peterson's greed. There's something else," Murphy continued. "The other victims, they all had children who were being groomed the same way Austin was groomed. Douglas would identify wealthy families, target the parents for murder, and convince the children that they were doing the right thing by participating in the conspiracy. Austin wasn't Douglas's first victim. He was just the latest in a long line of children who were manipulated into becoming accomplices to murder. This revelation changed everything about how I viewed Austin's crimes. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it provided a context that made his actions understandable, if not forgivable. Austin hadn't simply decided to murder me for money. He had been systematically brainwashed by a professional manipulator who specialized in turning children against their parents. That evening, I called Sarah and told her about Murphy's discovery. "Dad," she said, "does this change how you feel about Austin?" It was a question I had been asking myself since Murphy left my office. "It changes how I understand what happened," I replied. "But it doesn't change what he chose to do. Understanding why someone commits a crime isn't the same as excusing the crime." "Are you going to write to him? Tell him what we learned about Douglas's other victims?" "No," I said. "Austin needs to serve his sentence and find his own way to redemption. My job isn't to make his imprisonment easier. It's to make sure that the legacy of our family is something other than betrayal and murder." By the end of the summer, the Crawford Children's Heart Foundation had performed 47 successful surgeries. 47 children who might otherwise have died were alive and healthy because of the foundation's work. It was a number that had special significance for me. 47 was exactly the number of hours of incriminating conversations I had recorded during my 6-month investigation of Austin's murder plot. Each life saved represented 1 hour of betrayal transformed into something good. As autumn approached, I found myself thinking more and more about forgiveness. Not for Austin's sake, but for my own. The weight of carrying anger and betrayal was exhausting, and I realized that my refusal to forgive wasn't hurting Austin. He was in federal prison and would remain there for decades. My anger was only hurting me. But forgiveness, I learned, isn't a single decision. It's a process that unfolds slowly, sometimes taking steps backward before moving forward again. In October, I received an unexpected visitor, Assistant District Attorney Rachel Martinez, who had prosecuted Austin's case. She came to my office at the foundation with news about a development in the ongoing investigation. "Dr. Crawford," she said, "I wanted to inform you personally that we've received cooperation from several of Douglas Peterson's other victims' families. Austin's case has become the cornerstone of a much larger prosecution effort. His testimony about Douglas's manipulation tactics has been instrumental in convicting other members of the conspiracy." "Austin is cooperating with prosecutors?" I asked. "Extensively," Martinez replied. "He's provided detailed testimony about Douglas's methods, which has helped us understand how other families were targeted. His cooperation has directly resulted in 3 additional convictions and helped us prevent 2 other planned murders." This information forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about my son's character. Yes, he had participated in a plot to murder me, but he was also actively working to prevent other families from suffering the same devastation that our family had experienced. "There's something else," Martinez continued. "Austin has declined all offers for reduced sentencing in exchange for his cooperation. He specifically requested that his full 25-year sentence be maintained. He said he doesn't want any reduction in punishment for his crimes against you." That evening, I sat in my study, the same study where I had first overheard Austin planning my murder, and tried to process what I had learned. My son was serving his full sentence without seeking any reduction, while simultaneously working to prevent other families from experiencing what ours had gone through. For the first time in almost a year, I allowed myself to think about the Austin I had raised. The little boy who had bandaged injured birds, the teenager who had worked summers at the free clinic, the young man who had called me his hero. That person had been real. The man who had plotted my murder was also real. Both versions of Austin existed, and somehow I needed to find a way to acknowledge both without excusing either. On November 15th, exactly 11 months after I had first overheard Austin discussing my murder, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wrote him a letter, not a letter of forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that yet, but a letter of acknowledgement. I acknowledged the good man he had once been, the terrible crimes he had committed, and the redemptive work he was doing now. I told him about the foundation, about the children whose lives had been saved, about the way our family's tragedy had been transformed into something that served others. I ended the letter with a single sentence. "You are still my son, and you always will be, regardless of what you have done or what you do next." I didn't mail the letter immediately. I carried it in my jacket pocket for 2 weeks, reading it periodically, revising it, questioning whether I was making the right decision. Finally, on December 1st, I mailed it. Austin wrote back within a week. His response was brief. Thank you for seeing me as more than the worst thing I've ever done. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that grace. December 25th marked the 1 year anniversary of the Christmas dinner that had destroyed and ultimately redeemed our family. I spent the morning at the foundation, visiting with children who were scheduled for surgery in the coming weeks. There's something magical about Christmas morning in a children's hospital. Despite the illness and fear, there's an underlying current of hope and resilience that puts everything else in perspective. Sarah found me in the pediatric playroom, where I was reading Christmas stories to a group of young patients. She had brought coffee and pastries from our favorite bakery, the same bakery where Elizabeth and I had bought birthday cakes for Austin and Sarah when they were children. "How are you doing today, Dad?" she asked as we settled into chairs overlooking the hospital's winter garden. "I'm okay," I said, and realized that I meant it. "For the first time in a year, I'm actually okay." "Have you heard from Austin recently?" "He writes every few weeks," I replied. "Nothing dramatic. Updates about his cooperation with prosecutors, descriptions of the education programs he's participating in, reflections on what he's learned about himself. It's healing, I think, for both of us." Sarah smiled. "Mom would be proud of you, for the foundation, for the way you've handled all of this, for finding a way to see Austin as more than his worst act." "Your mother always believed in redemption," I said. "She believed that people could change, that mistakes, even terrible mistakes, didn't have to define someone forever. I'm trying to live up to her example." We sat in comfortable silence, watching snow fall outside the hospital windows. In the distance, I could see families arriving for Christmas visits with patients. Some of those families were experiencing the worst Christmas of their lives, confronting the possibility of losing a child to heart disease. Others were experiencing the best Christmas imaginable, celebrating their child's recovery and return to health. The foundation had taught me something important about the nature of tragedy and healing. They often coexist. You can experience profound loss and meaningful recovery simultaneously. You can grieve for what was lost while celebrating what was saved. You can love someone while acknowledging the harm they've caused. At 2:00 p.m., Detective Murphy arrived for our annual Christmas check-in. It had become a tradition. He would update me on any developments in the ongoing cases related to Douglas Peterson's criminal network, and I would update him on the Foundation's progress. "Good news this Christmas," Murphy said, accepting a cup of coffee. "The FBI closed the last of Douglas Peterson's cases yesterday. 17 murder convictions, 43 insurance fraud convictions, and more than $2 billion in fraudulent claims identified and recovered. It's the largest insurance fraud prosecution in federal history." "And Austin's cooperation was instrumental in those prosecutions?" I asked. "Essential," Murphy replied. "Without his testimony about Douglas's manipulation tactics, we never would have been able to establish the pattern of psychological coercion that Douglas used on other families. Austin's willingness to testify, even though it meant admitting to additional crimes he hadn't been charged with, directly resulted in justice for hundreds of victims." That evening, Sarah and I had dinner at my house, the same house where Austin had grown up, where Elizabeth had died, where I had spent 6 months uncovering my family's betrayal. We had briefly considered selling the house after Austin's arrest, but ultimately decided that running away from the site of our trauma wouldn't solve anything. Instead, we chose to reclaim it, to fill it with new memories that honored what our family had been at its best. After dinner, we exchanged gifts. Sarah gave me a photo album she had compiled of all the children who had been treated at the foundation during its first year of operation. 47 children, each one alive and healthy because of the work we were doing. I gave Sarah a letter, not a Christmas gift in the traditional sense, but something I thought she needed to see. It was a letter I had written to her but never intended to send, expressing my gratitude for her courage during the investigation, my pride in the woman she had become, and my recognition that she had saved not just my life, but my faith in the possibility of family loyalty. As we sat by the fireplace, looking through the photo album of children whose hearts we had repaired, I thought about the strange circularity of life. A year ago, I had been planning to spend Christmas dinner with people who wanted to kill me. Tonight, I was spending Christmas evening with my daughter, looking at pictures of children whose lives we had saved together. Dad, Sarah said, do you think Austin will ever be able to forgive himself for what he did? I don't know, I replied, but I think he's on the right path. And I think forgiveness of others and of ourselves is something we have to choose every day, not just once. Have you forgiven him? It was the question I had been avoiding for months, and I realized that I finally had an answer. I'm learning to, I said. Every day I'm learning to. As I write this story, 18 months have passed since that Christmas dinner that changed everything. Austin is serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. He has completed his GED, earned a bachelor's degree through the prison education program, and is working toward a master's degree in social work. He wants to spend his post-release years working with at-risk youth, helping to prevent other children from being manipulated the way he was manipulated. The Crawford Children's Heart Foundation has now performed more than 200 successful surgeries. We've expanded to include a pediatric research division that's working on innovative treatments for congenital heart defects. The foundation has also established a victim services program that provides counseling and support for families who have been targeted by financial elder abuse. Sarah was elected as the youngest district attorney in our county's history. Her platform focused on protecting vulnerable populations from financial exploitation, and she has assembled a team of prosecutors who specialize in cases involving family fraud and elder abuse. She credits her experience with our family's case as the foundation for her understanding of how trust can be weaponized against the people who are most vulnerable. Douglas Peterson died in federal prison 6 months ago. According to the prison medical examiner, he suffered a massive heart attack while exercising in the prison yard. There's a certain poetic justice in the fact that he died from the same kind of cardiac event that I had spent my career preventing. Victor Kozlov is still serving his sentence and will likely die in prison. Stephanie was released after serving 16 months of her 20-year sentence. Her sentence was reduced because she provided testimony about other cases in Douglas's criminal network and because she had no prior criminal history. She moved back to her hometown in Oregon and, according to the last report I received, is working as a home health aide. We have had no contact since her arrest. I receive letters from Austin every month. Our correspondence has evolved from his initial expressions of remorse to discussions about philosophy, literature, and the nature of redemption. He often asks about the Foundation's work, and I send him photographs of the children we've treated. He keeps those photographs on the wall of his prison cell, he says, as a reminder that good can come from even the worst circumstances. Last month, Austin asked if I would consider visiting him in prison. It would be our first face-to-face conversation since Christmas dinner. I haven't decided yet whether I'm ready for that step, but I'm no longer certain that my answer is no. The question that haunts me most isn't whether Austin deserves forgiveness, but whether I deserve the peace that forgiveness might bring. I spent 35 years saving lives, and I failed to save my own son from becoming a person who could contemplate murder. As a father, as a doctor, as a human being, I carry the weight of that failure every day. But I've learned something important during these 18 months of healing. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past or pretending that terrible things didn't happen. Forgiveness is about choosing not to let those terrible things define your future. It's about recognizing that people are more complex than their worst acts, and that redemption is possible even after the most devastating betrayals. The Foundation's motto, carved in stone above the entrance to our main building, comes from something Elizabeth once said. Every heart can be repaired, but first you have to be willing to open it up and see what's broken inside. I'm still learning what that means, both for the children we treat and for the family we're rebuilding, one day at a time. Every heart can be repaired. That's what my wife Elizabeth always said, and it's the truth I've built my life around. But repair requires precision, skill, and most importantly, the courage to cut away what's diseased while preserving what can still be saved. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this. Family isn't defined by blood alone, but by loyalty, love, and the willingness to protect each other from harm. When someone violates that sacred trust, even someone you love, you have the right and the responsibility to seek justice. Not revenge, but justice. There's a difference, and that difference matters. Some of you listening to this story might be facing your own family betrayals, your own moments of discovering that the people you trusted most have betrayed that trust. To you, I want to say, you are not alone, you are not powerless, and you deserve better than the treatment you're receiving. Document everything, seek help from professionals you trust, and remember that choosing justice over loyalty isn't a betrayal of family. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do. The Crawford Children's Heart Foundation continues to save lives every day, transforming the money that was meant to be stolen through murder into healing for children who need it most. Austin continues to serve his sentence and work toward becoming the man I once believed him to be. Sarah continues to protect vulnerable families from predators who would exploit their trust for financial gain. And I continue to learn what forgiveness means. Not the kind of forgiveness that ignores justice or enables further harm, but the kind that acknowledges both the damage that was done and the possibility for redemption. Every family has a story. Some stories are filled with love and support. Others are marked by betrayal and broken trust. But all stories can be rewritten if we're brave enough to pick up the pen and start over. What's your family's story? What chapters need to be rewritten? What healing needs to happen? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me where you're listening from. Share your thoughts about family, loyalty, and the courage it takes to choose justice over comfort. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you understand your own family relationships in a new way, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the most important stories are the hardest ones to tell, but they're also the ones that can save lives. Thank you for listening. Until next time, remember, every heart can be repaired, but first, you have to be willing to see what's broken inside.